What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Table Rock Lake. We're here for a lake breakdown. We're gonna go through the sections of this lake and we're gonna kind of talk about how I like to approach this lake depending on the different seasons. So this lake is really special to me. I remember catching my first bass fishing by myself out here with my dad and my great-grandpa. You know, some of the first big tournaments I ever won in my life were on this lake. And you can't help but smile because this place has been really great to me over the years. So this lake's a highland reservoir. When it comes to cover, you don't have a lot of options here. You've pretty much pea gravel, you've got chunk rock, you've got ledge rock, and you've got bluff. Trees or some boat docks. A lot of times you kind of have to get real specific with them and break down what kind of rock they want to be on, what kind of trees they want to be on, or docks and what kind of area they want to be on. I feel like this place is so good and so special because it's just so big. The water is very high in nutrients. It's all kinds of big bass snacks swimming around in here. This place does a really good job of growing them. This big monster of a lake right here is Table Rock, but we're gonna keep it simple today. We're gonna break it down, in the lower section, mid-lake, and then you're gonna have the rivers. So lower lake to me is, everywhere from pretty much the 86 bridge, which is down in the dam area, all the way to Cow Creek. Then I'm gonna go to the midsection, which is gonna be from Cow Creek to, the mouth of the James and the mouth of the White. And then everything from there up is gonna be the rivers. And then everything from the 86 bridge up Long Creek is gonna be a river also. All right, so this lower section, it's got all kinds of different cover. It's got a lot of different kinds of rock, but it's got lots of pea gravel. A lot of times, this is where some of the best wintertime fishing happens. So if you wanna target smallmouth or if you wanna fish deep, it's a really great place to fish. So whenever we talk about the midsection of Table Rock, you start to get a little bit more watercolor in this area. A lot of times, once you get into that, little more off-colored water, it does make the fish a little bit easier to trick. It seems like to me, this midsection of the lake really seems to shine in the springtime and the wintertime. All right, so we moved on up to the upper section. It's a giant section. If I'm wanting to fish shallow, these are the areas that I'm gonna concentrate on. There's a lot of bushes in these areas and the water's usually a little off-colored if we've had any kind of rain at all. So Table Rock lays in a pretty special place here in the Ozarks. It's got Branson just right beside the lake. So there's all kinds of awesome places to stay. It's got Big Cedar Lodge. You can go there and it's like you're in your own little city. It's a very family-friendly environment, and if you're looking for a place for a vacation, there's not a better place to come in the summertime because if you've never been here and got to experience it, you got to come check this place out. This place is covered up in boat ramps, so you've got lots of options for boat ramps. No need to run the whole lake and burn a bunch of boat fuel. It's a really easy lake to move around on without having to burn a bunch of fuel. So we're gonna start this thing off talking about breaking this lake down in the springtime. There's kind of that pre-spawn section of the springtime where they're not really on the bank that good yet. And when it's like that, I really like to target, the mid-lake area. As the spring progresses and the water, we get a few rains, the water starts to get dirty up the creeks and up the rivers. I really like to slide up those creeks and rivers and get in that little bit more off-colored water. So springtime, whenever I'm trying to catch fish shallow, I'm gonna be moving up a river, like I said. Right now I'm showing you up the James. And, when it comes to stuff I'm gonna target, a lot of the times I'm looking for, some kind of pocket. You kind of have to feel it out each day to see if they want to be on steep pockets or shallow pockets. But, things like these pockets right here, if they have good rock on the bank or if they have laydowns or something like that, this in the springtime, these are the kind of areas that I'm trying to target those fish in. All right, when it comes to springtime, I've got 3 baits that I use when I'm trying to catch them shallow. And the cool thing about all 3 of these baits is I throw them on pretty well the same kind of bank. A lot of times I'm looking for like that last deep water going into a spawning area and into where I feel like they're gonna spawn. And I choose these baits, depending on the watercolor. If it's real clean, I'll start with a jig. I'm pitching that jig around cover just down the bank. If I've got a little bit of a stain, a lot of times that's when I'm gonna pick up my chatterbait. This here is an XPS chatterbomb, and I've actually got a rocking chat on the back of it. That tail is real soft and it's got crazy action. But this is kind of, that moderate watercolor. Got a little bit of a stain to it, but not too dirty. And then last but not least, it's lots of fun when you get, a good flood, the water gets really dingy, and that's when I pick up the spinnerbait. This is called the Brawler Blade, and I like the single Colorado. That's probably my favorite blade configuration. I can just keep this bait around the cover for a long time, but no doubt all three of these baits are going to help you put more fish in the boat in the springtime. When I'm thinking summertime fishing, it's going to be end of May, beginning of June, and those fish are wanting to move back offshore. And always around cover, because fish don't like to roam around a lot most of the time after they're, spawned out and tired. They're going to want to hang around some kind of cover, kind of, replenish their body from that springtime. Summertime for me, I like to fish the midsection of the lake, right here around Kimberlin City. And when I zoom into the map, the cool thing about this Garmin map, it shows you where all the boat docks are. So I'm gonna look, at main lake points, or I'm gonna look at boat docks just outside of spawning pockets. I'm considering this an area that I know some bass are gonna spawn, and here's some boat docks right outside of that area, that I know they're gonna stop on. And same across the pocket over here, and it's even on a secondary point. So it's a really great place to find, maybe some brush piles around the dock. As they work their way out, I work my way out with them. Looking for deep structure like brush piles, main lake points, anywhere around a good steep drop like that is usually a really good place to catch a bass. All right, everybody, when it comes to baits, for those summertime bass, I'm throwing at targets, throwing at these, big rocks, throwing at a steep break or brush pile. I feel like it's that time of year that a big bait will help you catch a big bass. So I like to throw a really big jig. This here's a 3/4 ounce. Got a full-size crawl trailer on the back of it. This is just a really big profile bait. I feel like that's something the fish is gonna eat. They're trying to fatten back up after the spawn. Number 2 was a big worm. This is a big straight tail worm. You can also throw a big curly worm. I've got this Texas rigged. That's just been a staple of this lake, been a staple of bass fishing forever, especially in the summertime. I also throw a big Dixie Jet, a big Talon. It looks like a big dying gizzard. I just feel like in order to get those really big fish to react, a really big bait is just going to give you better odds of them biting. So fall time for me usually is, September through end of November most of the time. I'm spending a lot of time on the bank, covering a lot of water. That's kind of what I do for the first part of the fall. And that's the time of the year where a lot of times it's the toughest fishing, but it can still be good once you get around them. Not a bad one. So when I'm thinking fall fishing, a lot of the time, I'm gonna fish the mid-lake, into the river section. And a lot of the times I'm looking for a really flat pocket. You see how the back of this pocket is real flat? And this point is real flat. I like to try to fish a lot of that flatter water and just burning down the bank. Fishing this isolated boat dock over here at the mouth of this little pocket and just keep flying. Fish around that flat point and go on to the next pocket. A lot of the time I'll try to see how many good high percentage areas like that I can hit in a day. All right, so we found the perfect fall time area. So now let's get into the baits. We're gonna start off with the bait that I'm gonna cover the most water with, that I'm gonna have, in my hand most of the time. This is a buzz bait. Either a buzz bait or a plopper style bait, will work. Kind of each day they bite one better than the other. You never know, you just gotta feel them out. I'm gonna be throwing this bait pretty much on the bank and winding it off. You can cover a lot of water quickly, and it gets you those big bites. So you just gotta hope you wind it over one's head in a day's time. When it comes to actually picking apart targets, when I get to that boat dock, I want to skip that jig up underneath that float, or a lay down that I want to skip my jig in. This is the jig I'm throwing a lot of time, just a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce jig. Right now I've got a chunk trailer on it. You can either use a chunk or a twin tail that flaps. These are basically the two baits that I'm going to keep in my hand on a tough fall day to make sure I get 5 good bites in the boat. All right, so whenever I'm talking about winter, most of the time, you know, I'm thinking beginning of December to mid-February timeframe. That's usually when it's the coldest around here. We see our coldest water temperatures usually in that February timeframe. And this is a season whenever I'm strictly fishing for suspended fish for the most part. I'm out fishing for fish that are eating bait fish, and man, it's one of my favorite times of the year. You know, you can catch a lot of fish and you can catch some really big ones this time of year. So in the wintertime, you know, I'm moving back down towards the lower end of the lake. You know, right here, we're in the Cow Creek area. And as these fish start to pull off and suspend, you're gonna see them, you know, hug these creek ditches. They're gonna get right out here in the middle, wherever the bait fish is at, and the bass are gonna be moving with the bait fish. Depending on the water temperature, sometimes they move back in these little side drains and stuff like that. In the wintertime, you get around the bait fish, you get around the bass, so you gotta use your electronics.
There he is.
Cover a lot of water, and make sure you're around all the bait. All right, so once you're in your wintertime area, you know, usually my primary technique that I'm gonna use to try to, you know, catch some big ones is, you know, find the bait fish and use my live scope, look around, you know, and try to catch them on the jig head minnow. This here is a rocking shad. I've actually got it on an 1/8 ounce head for when those fish are really high in the water column. A lot of times in the wintertime, when we get a good sunny day, they like to raise up and let that sun warm them up. But there's some days where you just can't see them good. You know, they hug the bottom, they hug the cover. And when they get in those trees and get in the cover, you know, especially when the water's really cold, you know, I love a jerk bait. This here is a stare down, and you can get a jerk bait around cover and work it very, very slow. And a lot of times it'll pull those sluggish bass out of the cover. And then, you know, your next resort, if you can't get them to come out on your jerk bait, you know, you pick up an Alabama rig, and you know, just this one here is a giant one. Got a lot of baits on it. Seems like for me, the colder the water, you know, the bigger the rig. Seems like it kind of helps bring them out of the cover. All right, guys, that's my quick breakdown of Table Rock Lake. And I tell you what, I hope it helps you guys out. I hope it helps you put bigger fish in the boat. I don't know about you guys, but it's springtime and I'm about to go out there and catch me one.